It is a cold morning, maybe 40 degrees, and there is a rider standing over a 1970s Honda CB750 in a dim garage. He does not push a button. He reaches down and pulls the choke lever out, swings a leg over, and gives the Kickstarter a long, deliberate stroke. The engine coughs, catches, and settles into a lumpy, uneven idle that fills the whole space with the smell of gasoline and cold metal. He blips the throttle a few times to keep it alive while it warms. His hand is doing the thinking that a computer does today. And in about a minute, when the engine finally smooths out, he pushes the choke back in, rolls out into the empty road, and it is just him and a machine that does absolutely nothing he does not tell it to do. That morning ritual is almost gone now. And here is the strange part. We are safer for losing it. Far safer, actually. The numbers on that are not even close. But if you have ridden long enough, you know that something disappeared along the way, something we do not really have a good word for, and nobody quite decided to give it up. It just slipped out the back door while we were admiring the new features. So today we are going to talk about it honestly, both sides, no rose-tinted goggles, what we gained when motorcycles got safe, and what we lost. Rewind about 50 years to a garage exactly like that one, and the machine in front of you is gloriously, stubbornly dumb. There is no screen, there is no ride mode, there is a carburetor, which is a beautifully simple brass and aluminum device that mixes air and fuel using nothing but vacuum and physics, and it does not automatically compensate for weather or temperature or altitude. That was your job. On a cold day, you use the choke. On a hot day, you do not. If the bike is running rough, you do not plug in a laptop. You get out a set of feeler gauges and tiny screwdrivers, and you actually tune the thing yourself on the floor with your hands. Jetting a carburetor was a rite of passage. You learned your specific motorcycle the way you learn a person, by its moods and its quirks, and the exact way it liked to be started on a Tuesday in November. The throttle was a steel cable. When you twisted your wrist, you were physically pulling open a butterfly valve through a wire, and every bit of that connection traveled straight back up into your hand. There was nothing between your intention and the engine's response. No sensor deciding whether you really meant it. No software smoothing the edges. If you were clumsy with the throttle in a corner, the bike was clumsy right back. The machine told you the truth about yourself instantly, every single time. And the brakes. The brakes just did what your fingers did. If you grabbed too much front brake on a wet road, the wheel locked and you were a passenger. There was no electronic guardian angel pulsing the lever 100 times a second to save you. Managing traction was not a feature, it was the entire skill. Reading the road surface, feeling the tire start to let go through the seat of your pants, easing off before it was too late. That was riding. That was the actual craft of it. This was the world of the universal Japanese motorcycle, the UJM, a formula the Honda CB750 helped define back in 1969, and that Kawasaki, Suzuki, and Yamaha spent the 1970s perfecting. An upright, air-cooled, carbureted, honest machine that a whole generation learned on. And then came the fast stuff. In 1985, Suzuki dropped the GSX R750, a genuine race replica for the street that felt like a loaded weapon. In 1992, Honda unleashed the Fireblade, and later the Yamaha R1, bikes so raw and so fast that they came with exactly zero electronic help. No traction control, no wheelie control, no lean angle sensor, quietly watching over you. If you opened the throttle too hard exiting a corner, physics handed you the bill, and the bill could be enormous. These bikes demanded respect the way a table saw demands respect. They made you a better, sharper, more present rider because the alternative was genuinely terrifying. And it was not just about danger and skill, it was a whole sensory world. An air-cooled engine with a carburetor and a real exhaust made a sound with texture to it, a mechanical bark that rose and fell with actual character, not the filtered, emissions-legal hum of a modern bike. Plenty of riders wore open-face helmets, and a fair number wore no helmet at all, feeling every bit of wind and temperature and bug on their skin, for better and very much for worse. Sunday mornings meant a cluster of guys standing around a bike in a driveway, passing tools and arguing about jetting and float heights, because understanding the machine was the price of admission, and nobody expected a computer to do it for you. That shared, greasy, hands-on knowledge was the culture. It was the thing that turned a hobby into a brotherhood. I want to be careful here because this is exactly where nostalgia turns into lying. Those bikes were not better. A lot of people got hurt on them doing things that a modern bike would have quietly forgiven. But there was an intimacy to that danger. You and the machine were partners in something real, and both of you had a vote. Then, in 1988, in a factory in Germany, that partnership started to change. BMW took its sport touring flagship, the K100 RS, and bolted on something no production motorcycle had ever carried before: anti-lock brakes. The K100 RS ABS, launched in late 1988, became the first mass-produced motorcycle in history where a computer could override your hand at the brake lever. Grab a fistful of brake on a wet road, and instead of locking and dropping you, the system would sense the wheel about to stop turning and release, and grab and release faster than any human ever could. It was, by every reasonable measure, a genuinely brilliant piece of engineering. And here is a detail I love, because it tells you everything about where this was heading. That same K100 engine had already ditched the carburetor years earlier for Bosch fuel injection. So this one motorcycle was quietly carrying both of the technologies that would eventually reshape the entire sport. The German engineers were not trying to steal anyone's soul. They were trying to stop people from dying in the rain. That is worth remembering every time this story gets emotional. For a while, things actually seemed fine. The anti-lock braking system was expensive, it was heavy, it was mostly on big touring bikes for older, richer riders, and the sport bike crowd rolled their eyes and kept doing their own braking. The old world and the new world coexisted. That did not last, because once the first computer earned its place on a motorcycle, the floodgates were open. And the next wave did not come from a safety lab, it came from the racetrack. Pay attention to this next part, because it explains almost everything about the bike in your garage today. In MotoGP, engineers had spent years developing electronic systems that could manage traction at the absolute limit, at lean angles that would make your stomach drop, on tires screaming for grip, traction control, anti-wheelie, launch control. And what happens in racing always trickles down to the street. It is just a question of when. And the timing? Right around 2008 and 2009. Ducati brought competition-derived traction control to its production superbikes with the 1098R, and by 2009 the 1198S was running a system with 8 levels of adjustable Ducati traction control, letting the electronics catch a rear tire that a rider's wrist would have lost. And in the same window, BMW walked into the superbike world it had never really competed in, and dropped a bomb called the S1000RR. This thing did not just have traction control. It had optional race anti-lock braking system, traction control, and multiple ride modes, a full electronics suite that made nearly 193 horsepower manageable for mortals. It rewrote the rules overnight. Within a few short years, every manufacturer was in an electronics arms race, and the raw, unassisted literbike, the kind that made you earn every mile, started quietly going extinct. Then it went deeper. Around the same era, the physical throttle cable, that direct steel connection between your wrist and the engine, began to disappear. The 2006 Yamaha YZF R6 was one of the first street bikes to go ride-by-wire, replacing the cable with a sensor and a wire and a computer that decided how to translate your input. Now, when you rolled on the gas, you were making a suggestion, and the electronics were deciding how to honor it. Smoother? Yes. Safer? Absolutely. But that last inch of raw, unfiltered mechanical honesty between rider and engine that was now routed through a processor, And while all of this was happening, the humble carburetor was dying too, quietly, for reasons that had nothing to do with feel and everything to do with clean air. As emissions rules tightened across Europe and the rest of the world through the 1990s and the 2000s, the carburetor simply could not meet them. It was too imprecise, too dependent on weather and temperature, too analog for a regulated world. So the manufacturers switched to fuel injection across the board, and the choke lever, that little pull knob that every rider used to fiddle with on a cold morning, vanished from new motorcycles entirely. Fuel injection is better in almost every measurable way. It starts instantly, it runs cleaner, it never floods, it does not care about altitude. But the ritual went with it, a whole tiny language of cold start knowledge, gone in one generation, replaced by a starter button and a computer that just handles it. Even the racing changed, which tells you how deep this went. At the very top level, in MotoGP, the electronics got so sophisticated that the debate stopped being about whether the rider or the machine was in control, and became about how much the software should be allowed to do at all. Series organizers eventually forced everyone onto a single standard electronics package, specifically to hand some of the craft back to the human being on the bike, because the systems had gotten good enough to blur what a rider even was. When the fastest racers on Earth are arguing about the machine doing too much of the thinking, you know the ground has shifted for all of us. And then came the piece that still amazes me. In 2013, Bosch introduced motorcycle stability control built around an inertial measurement unit, a tiny sensor package that knows, in real time, exactly how far the bike is leaned over, how fast it is pitching, how it is moving through space. First fitted to the 2014 KTM 1190 Adventure, it made something possible that used to be pure fantasy: cornering a BS. You could now squeeze the brakes hard while leaned over in a corner, the one situation that used to throw riders down the road without mercy, and instead of instantly tucking the front and losing it, the electronics would greatly reduce the chance of that low side. It cannot beat physics. Nothing can. But it dramatically widened the margin between a scare and a hospital visit. The machine was no longer just reacting to your inputs. It understood the physics of the moment better than you did. Somewhere in there, quietly, the relationship flipped. For most of motorcycle history, the rider was the smartest thing on the motorcycle, the one part of the whole system actually making decisions. Now, in a lot of situations, the motorcycle was the smartest thing on the motorcycle, and that is not a villain's story. Nobody did this to us. We asked for it, we bought it, and it worked. If you are riding with me on this one, take a second and subscribe, because this channel is all about the machines and the culture and the honest, complicated history behind both. It genuinely helps more than you know. Now let's talk about the moment the choice stopped being ours. By the mid-2010s, all of this stopped being optional. For decades, safety tech on a motorcycle was a decision. You could buy the bike with anti-lock brakes or buy the one without, and live with the consequences either way. Then the regulators did the math on all those lives, and the era of choice ended. In the European Union, anti-lock brakes became legally mandatory on every new motorcycle over 125 cubic centimeters, phased in starting January 1st, 2016. India followed with its own mandate for bikes above 125 cubic centimeters from April 2019. The United Kingdom, Brazil, Japan, Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand all fell into line. And Singapore is going further than most, requiring anti-lock brakes on every newly registered motorcycle, including the little ones under 125 cubic centimeters from April 2027, and its transport authority says it will be the first country in Southeast Asia to do it. Think about what that actually means. It means that in most of the developed world, you can no longer buy a new motorcycle that does what every motorcycle did for the first 100 years of the sport. The raw version is not just unpopular now. In a lot of places, it is illegal to sell. The choice that defined a century of riding was made permanently on our behalf. And the uncomfortable truth is that they made it for a very good reason. So let's be adults about this and look hard at what we got, because it is the honest heart of the whole story. The safety technology works. Not kind of, not on paper. It flat out works, and the research is overwhelming. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which has studied this for years, found that motorcycles with ABS are involved in fatal crashes at a rate 22 to 31% lower than the exact same models without it. Read that again. Same bike, same engine, same riders on average. And simply adding anti-lock brakes cut fatal crash involvement by up to nearly a third. The Highway Loss Data Institute found ABS cut collision insurance claims by around 20% and injury claims by nearly 30%. And they controlled for the obvious objection that maybe safer riders just buy safer bikes, and the benefit held up anyway. Eric Teo, the IIHS statistician behind much of this work, put it about as plainly as a researcher ever does. He said they have known ABS saves lives and have been saying it should be mandatory for a decade. This is not a nanny state fantasy. This is a wheel that will not lock and throw you into oncoming traffic when a car pulls out and you panic, grab the brakes. That scenario, the emergency stop gone wrong, is one of the most common ways riders die, and ABS directly attacks it. Traction control goes after another classic danger, more throttle than the available grip can handle, the kind of greedy handful that used to fling riders over the high side. The crash data on traction control is harder to isolate than ABS, since it usually arrives bundled with a dozen other electronics, but the physics it manages is exactly the physics that used to hurt people. There is a second thing we gained too, and it matters more than riders like to admit. The old machines were gatekeepers. They were so unforgiving that they quietly filtered out anyone who was not young, strong, mechanically inclined, and willing to accept real risk just to get started. Modern bikes, with their smooth fuel injection, their forgiving electronics, and their approachable power delivery, open the door to people the old world basically kept out. Riders who never would have survived the learning curve on a raw 1980s superbike are out there today, riding for years, enjoying it, staying alive. The share of motorcycle owners who are women has climbed from around 6% in 1990 to roughly 19%, and newer riders in general tend to train more and ride smarter. Some of that is culture, but a lot of it is that the machine finally stopped punishing beginners quite so brutally for the crime of learning. That is not a small thing to hand back to people. I have to be honest with you. If I love the old machines, and I do, I also cannot sit here and pretend these systems have not kept a lot of people breathing who would not otherwise be. Every rider reading this probably knows someone who went down. Some of them would still be here if their bike had been just a little bit smarter than they were in one terrible half second. That is not nostalgia, that is the receipt. So if the tech is this good, and it clearly is, why does this video exist at all? Why does that garage on a cold morning still tug at something? Because safer and the same are not the same word. And here is where we count the cost. Start with skill. There is an old idea in the riding world taught for decades by people like Keith Code, who founded the California Superbike School and wrote the book that a generation of riders learned from. Code talks about survival reactions, the hardwired, panicky things a rider's body does when it gets scared. Chopping the throttle, stabbing the brakes, staring at the thing you are about to hit. The whole craft of riding well is training yourself out of those reactions, spending your limited attention wisely, staying smooth when everything in you wants to flinch. On an old motorcycle, you had to build those skills because nothing else was going to save you. You were the safety system, the entire safety system, On a modern bike, the electronics quietly absorb a lot of your mistakes before you ever feel them. That is wonderful when a car pulls out. It is more complicated over 10 years because the rider who never gets punished for a sloppy input never gets the lesson either. The bike forgives you so completely that you sometimes never learn there was anything to forgive. Now, plenty of instructors will tell you this concern is overblown, that a living rider who leaned on ABS beats a dead rider who is building character, and they have a point. But there is a real, quiet debate happening in every riding community about whether we are producing riders who are genuinely skilled, or riders who are being carried by their machines and cannot always tell the difference. Then there is the paradox, and it is a big one, so sit with it. We have spent 35 years making motorcycles dramatically safer. ABS, traction control, stability control, better tires, better brakes, all of it. And yet, in the United States, motorcyclist deaths are not down. They are at record highs. Around 6,335 riders were killed in 2023, roughly triple the number back in 1997. How is that even possible with all this technology? The answer is a lesson in humility. Safety tech is not magic. There are more bikes on the road. The riders are older and more fragile, and older bodies survive crashes less well. The bikes are faster and heavier than ever. Distraction from phones has exploded for riders and for the drivers around them. Several US states rolled back their helmet laws, and deaths climbed right on cue. The machine got smarter, but the world it rides in got more dangerous in other ways. And the human at the controls is still gloriously, stubbornly human. Technology raised the floor. It did not, and cannot, raise it all the way to safe. And here is maybe the quietest loss of all, the one you cannot measure in a crash study. The sport is graying. According to the Motorcycle Industry Council's long-running owner survey, the median age of a United States motorcycle owner climbed from about 27 in the mid-1980s to 50 by 2018. In that same stretch, the youngest riders nearly vanished. Industry summaries of that survey data put ownership among the under 18 crowd falling from around 8% to roughly 2%, and the 18 to 24 group dropping from about 16% down to 6%. New motorcycle sales in America are running at roughly half their mid-2000s peak. Tim Bush, who ran the Motorcycle Industry Council, said it carefully, but you can hear the worry in it, that some of the numbers are encouraging, like more women riding, but the rising median age shows where the work still needs to be done. Put simply, the generation that grew up wrenching on carburetors in the driveway is aging out, and the generation that might replace them mostly grew up with everything electronic, everything mediated, everything smoothed over by software. The intimacy of understanding your own machine, the grease under the fingernails, the Saturday afternoon spent chasing a rough idle, that whole culture of mechanical closeness is thinning out. Not because anyone killed it, because the machine stopped needing it, and then the people stopped learning it. So where does that leave us, standing in the cold garage at the end of all this? Go back to that rider and the 1970s CB750, the choke lever, the kickstart, the lumpy idle, and the smell of gas. That whole ritual was never really about being difficult for its own sake. It was about a relationship, a machine that demanded something from you, that made you show up present and skilled and awake, and gave you back a kind of raw, honest connection that a computer, no matter how brilliant, can only imitate. That is the thing that slipped out the back door, not safety, not speed, connection. But here is where I refuse to lie to you, one rider to another. We are not going back, and if we are honest, we should not want to. The old machines were beautiful, and they were cruel, and the graveyards are full of people who loved them. The engineers in Germany and Japan and everywhere else who built anti-lock brakes and traction control were not stealing anyone's soul. They were saving lives, thousands and thousands of them, and the data proves they succeeded. Anyone who tells you the good old days were simply better is quietly editing out the funerals. What we lost was real, and what we gained was real too. Both things are true at the same time, and a grown-up rider can hold both in his head without flinching. The machine got safer and the machine got quieter, and somewhere in the middle of all that progress, it started doing a little of the thinking that used to be ours alone. The good news is that the old feeling is not extinct. It is just something you have to go looking for now, on a carbureted survivor in a back alley garage, on an empty road early in the morning, on a bike simple enough to still tell you the truth about yourself. The choke lever is still out there, you just have to want it. So maybe that is the real question this whole thing leaves us with. Not whether motorcycles should have gotten safe. They should have. The graves settle that argument. The real question is quieter than that. When you let a machine start protecting you from your worst instincts, and it works and it saves your life, what exactly did you agree to hand over in return? And is any part of you still allowed to miss it? If this hits something for you, the comments are open, and I already know we are not going to agree, which is exactly the point. Tell me what you ride, tell me what you think we lost, and tell me if I got it wrong. I will see you on the next one. Ride safe out there, and I do mean that.